Hey, what's going on out there? I'm Sean Devine. Hope you all are doing well. In this video, we're going to be taking a close listen to the all-new SSL Fusion plugins. Specifically, I'm going to be mastering a track from scratch. Some of you might be familiar with my mastering video that I did for the SSL Fusion hardware, which that's something that I've been utilizing in my studio for a while now. But for those of you who don't have that and you've been waiting for something that's going to give you that processing, these plugins are really exciting. Not only can we use them throughout our entire session, but we can also utilize them on the stereo bus, which is, my favorite use of the Fusion. There's some unique things about the plugins, some new functionality that actually make these even more flexible than the hardware. But just to note, this is not a comparison in any way or not intended to be. Fundamentally, they are different, but that's not to say that you can't get similar results and comparably great sounding results. All right, so a couple of things to note before we get started. The SSL Native Bus Compressor 2 is the first plugin in my mastering chain. I have this on here just because I use a very light ratio, provides some glue. If you're interested in the details of why I'm utilizing this and how I set it up, I'll put a link to it. And then we're going directly into the Fusion plugins, which I've ordered these in the same order that they would be in the hardware. So first we have the SSL Fusion Vintage Drive. We have the Fusion Violet EQ. Then we have the HF compressor, and that is followed by the stereo image. Now, finally, I have a maximizer or a limiter here just as a safety net. It's parked at 0. So again, that's just so that we're not clipping in the video. Let's take a listen to the mix as is.
Fame or the fee, hard like she got the key. All I need is grace and love from the man up above. Fall back. I was aiming for the billboards, no awards to my name, signing NDAs, hearing stories on the Reddit, ghost producer missing credits. That's okay, that's on me. I could never find peace. All the words they spraying on these beats, what's it mean? Are we saying anything the people really need? Is the most important thing attention or the fees? You know they don't never add up. I lay this all before your throne. Lord, can't do this on my own.
All right, so that gives you a good idea of what we're working with in the mix. First module, Vintage Drive, one of my favorites from the Fusion hardware. It gives you this very pleasant yet edgy thickness to the sound, but we can utilize this very lightly, or we can drive it pretty aggressively, on things like vocals. The great thing about the plugin is we have a mix control, which makes this even more flexible in terms of using it on any number of sources, but also on the stereo bus. I just find this to be really useful. I'm gonna go ahead and activate the plugin, and I'm also gonna turn the wet all the way up to 100. We're gonna bring that back here, but let's turn the drive and the density up and just get a feel for it and adjust as needed.
Fame or the fee, hard like she got the key. All I need is grace and love from the man up above. Fall back. I was aiming for the billboards, no awards to my name, signing NDAs, hearing stories on the Reddit, ghost producer missing credits. That's okay, that's on me. I could never find peace. All the words they spraying on these beats, what's it mean? Are we saying anything the people really need? Is the most important thing attention or the fees?
With it mixed in at 100, you can already hear a huge difference just in that lift and in that perceived loudness, the saturation we're getting across our mix. Really nice, but I'm going to dial that back a little bit. It's the power of this control here. We can just kind of blend that in and make it, as noticeable or as subtle as we want.
Fame or the fee, hard like she got the key. All I need is grace and love from the man up above. Fall back. I was aiming for the billboards, no awards to my name, signing NDAs, hearing stories on the Reddit, ghost producer missing credits. That's okay, that's on me. I could never find peace. All the words they spraying on these beats, what's it mean? Are we saying anything the people really need?
Now, just to note, we also have an auto gain control. So those of you who are more sensitive about level matching, you can turn that on and match it there. We also have eco mode. That's going to make the plugin low latency, so you'll be able to track with it, but also it's going to make it more resourceful in terms of your CPU. So very handy to have that control. All right, up next we have the Violet EQ, and this was released most recently in terms of the plugins. And I will have to say that this is probably my favorite module in the Fusion hardware, and it sounds really good here in plugin form as well. We also have a new fat control, and that's going to introduce some resonance here at the bump on our high pass filter, so it can just add some thickness and a little bit more impact there when we adjust that. Let's go ahead and turn it on, and I'm going to adjust the high notch. Very, very appropriate for mastering because you can get that sheen, but it's not harsh. It won't take your head off. We're going to take a look at how we follow this with the high frequency compressor that is just going to give you that nice blend of brightness, but also keeping the mix or the master very pleasant.
You could never swerve in my lane, yeah. Feel the spirit all in my veins, yeah. Try to imitate, you can't sustain, yeah. We keep the most high on display, yeah. It ain't all about us. I lay this all before your throne. Lord, can't do this on my own. I've tried.
Yeah, so you can hear as we go into 16 and 20, we get that really nice top end air. But I find that the 12K notch here just does a nice thing with our vocals. So I'm going to leave that parked. Nice little boost of 3.5 dB. All good there. On the low frequency, I especially love this 30 and 50 notch. If you've got a low-end heavy mix like this one, it does something really pleasant with those subs. In addition to that, we can set the high-pass filter just to make sure that we don't have a lot of mud and murk down there. And we're also going to activate the fat control. So let's hear what that does.
You could never swerve in my lane, yeah. Feel the spirit all in my veins, yeah. Try to imitate, you can't sustain, yeah. We keep the most high on display, yeah. It ain't all about us. I lay this all before your throne. Lord, can't do this on my own. I've tried 1,000 times, refocusing these tired eyes. Refocusing these tired eyes. They said I could never do it like this.
When I first started mixing, I felt like EQs, if they had the same frequency and the same notches, that they pretty much were going to do the same thing. But this is a great example of stuff that's going on behind the scenes that makes this an EQ that really stands out as mastering grade, and definitely has some of the similar tones from the hardware that I've really come to appreciate. Next up, we have the HF compressor, which I found is just the perfect complement for the Violet EQ, feeding that directly into this. We can retain the brightness, but we can tame a lot of the harshness in our mix and just give us a little bit more impact with this. So I will say this one does sound different, to me anyway, than the hardware, in the fact that not only does this kind of soften and round things, but with the auto gain and the mix control, when we blend that in, it actually will give us more of an impact and more of a glued sound as well. I'm going to bring the threshold up slowly until we're getting some attenuation. I'll adjust the crossover, bring that back, and then we're going to activate the new listen control to be able to monitor exactly what we're attenuating here with HFC.
Lay this all before your throne. Lord, can't do this on my own. Refocusing these tired eyes. They said I could never do it like this. They said I could never do it like this.
We get a nice taming of the snare. We also get some rounding of some of those high-end cymbals and things, the vocal, and you can really doctor this in to attenuate whatever you want and as much as you want. We can dial that all the way back to 3K, so we're getting a lot more of the control here. But the great thing about HFC is that what's going on behind the scenes makes this react very differently across sources. I would encourage you to experiment with this on drums as well as vocals, individual elements, because it does a really unique thing. Last but not least, we have the stereo image module. This is a foolproof way to get some of that 3D width to your master, but you don't introduce weird phasing that you can with some other plugins. So it's just a very easy way to do it. This is based on mid-side processing. Very easy to dial in, very easy to get a nice result with it. So let's turn that on. We're going to adjust the shuffle control, and this is directly related to the cutoff in the space. So we can, add weight, or we can actually carve space here in the stereo image. So let's go ahead and activate that, and we'll introduce a little bit of space as well as a little bit of width here.
All the words they spraying on these beats, what's it mean? Are we saying anything the people really need? Is the most important thing attention or the fees? You know they don't never add up. I lay this all before your throne. Lord, can't do this on my own. I've tried 1,000 times, refocusing these tired eyes. Refocusing these tired. Right now's the season to believe it. This love will find you, never leave it.
Some of the other imaging plugins I've used take a lot more work to get to what we just heard with stereo image. You could also hear that we can solo our sides or our stereo information and then adjust this, also making it much more easy to really focus that and dial it in as intended. All right, so now that we've added each of the Fusion modules here, I'm going to go ahead and disable them, and then we will enable them one by one so that we can hear what they're doing individually as well as collectively here for our mix.
Out here minding my own business, doing what I love, I never risk it. Seen you all up in your feelings, get it twisted. Why you seeking approval and never fit in? You could never swerve in my lane, feel the spirit all in my veins, try to imitate, you can't sustain, we keep the most high on display, it ain't all about us. I lay this all before your throne. Lord, can't do this on my own. I've tried 1,000 times, refocusing these tired eyes. Refocusing these tired eyes. They said I could never do it like this. Class in session, I ain't got no handouts. This all started back when mom was praying it would pan out for me. Not the fame or the fee, hard like she got the key.
Obviously, I love using the hardware, but there's times where I'm on the road, I'm on my laptop, and I don't have that with me. And I can't tell you how many times that's happened to me. And I just was like, man, I wish I could just put that Fusion in my backpack. But now with the plugins, we have something that is definitely capable on the same level. Again, I'm not saying it's the same, but as you could hear, the difference that these plugins make and the sound that they impart is on the same level in terms of what we can do, what we can add, how we can enhance and accentuate the different elements in our mix. Also, this is just on the stereo bus. We can have all this processing here just like I would have the Fusion hardware on my stereo bus, but now I can also utilize these plugins throughout my mix on individual elements. So I would encourage you to experiment. Also, just to mention that I did contribute presets that are included in the factory bank for these plugins. So if that's something that you are interested in, those are all there, and those are based on the very same settings that I've been using in the hardware for a long time. I try to get those to sound as close as possible and to give you a very similar result. So I hope you enjoy those. If you have any questions about the SSL Fusion plugins, feel free to leave a comment below. If you learn anything in the video, please like, subscribe, and consider sharing. Hit that notification bell for more. We'll talk to you soon.